not surprising that there's been a sharp drop in the, the freedom of the media index that the RSF has put out. And this is particularly evident over the last 8 years. In fact, since the mid-70s, when the former Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, imposed an emergency and put a large number of journalists behind bars, have we seen this kind of attempt or this kind of a government which has stifled free expression? Indira Gandhi's emergency lasted for 21 months. She was voted out of power in March 77. Mr. Narendra Modi has been Prime Minister of India for 8 years now. Well, almost 8 years. But what has happened is that what we are seeing today is, I'm sorry, my phone rang. Yeah, my fault. Okay, now this actually starts from the top. Mr. Narendra Modi is the first and so far the only Prime Minister of India who has never faced the media in an unscripted media conference where any journalist can ask him anything. He's the first and so far only Prime Minister. He has picked and chosen the people who can interview, including some non-journalists, including a well-known Indian, an actor who was a citizen of Canada, who asked him, Mr. Modi, how do you eat your mangoes? Do you cut it or do you suck the fruit? So we've seen a very, very substantial section of the so-called mainstream media having become completely subservient to those who are in positions of power and authority. There are several reasons for this. One important reason is purely financial. What we see is across the world and also in India, the old media or the traditional media or the legacy media, the advertising revenue from private organizations has not gone up, often stagnated. In many places it's come down, and this trend has been exacerbated during the pandemic. But that's true for India as well. And people are yet to devise ways to, those who read on screens and not on pieces of paper, how to monetize that content. But what's different about India is that there is a growing dependence on government advertising and government sponsorship. And that is one important reason why such a large section of the media in India is not asking difficult questions of those who are in power. And in fact, he who pays the piper calls the tune. So they are singing the tune of the government in power. They're not holding truth to power, not asking difficult questions, not asking questions. And we have a system, an ecosystem, which is discouraging dissent. Now, journalists who ask questions, they're immediately branded as traitors, as anti-nationals. If you're not with us, you must be against us. More than a centuries old British colonial era law of sedition has been used against several journalists. We've seen the laws on defamation being misused. We are seeing the information technology rules being used in a manner to target only the critics of the government. We've seen other law enforcing agencies, including the Income Tax Department, including the Enforcement Directorate, becoming weapons to target those who are critical of the government. And those, unlike most of us here on this panel who work out of metropolitan areas and cities, and some of us who come from privileged backgrounds, those who work in rural areas, those who work in remote areas, they have become extremely vulnerable. They have been vulnerable not only to physical attacks, they've been vulnerable to being put behind bars under some pretext or the other. Recently, there were journalists in the in Uttar Pradesh, in the eastern part of Uttar Pradesh, who exposed how examination papers were being leaked. And they were put behind bars. So, you're shooting the messenger and suing the messenger. So, I mean, we have a ridiculous situation where we have a journalist from Kerala called Siddiq Kappan, who has been behind bars for more than 575 days for an article he didn't write. He never got to write it. He went to report on the rape of a woman belonging to an underprivileged background, and he wasn't able to report. He's been accused of being part of some terrorist organizations. Journalists have been put behind bars using draconian laws. First information reports have been filed against them, and every manner of intimidation, harassment has been going on. Now, we have reached a stage where there are large sections of the government who believe that we can bludgeon that small section of the media, which is still trying to hold truth to power, which is still trying to ask questions, that we can actually harass them and intimidate them. Their sources of funding, whether it be the way they work. You have a series of what are called SLAPs, SLAPP, Strategic Litigation Against Public Participation, with the whole idea being to ensure that journalists and the owners of media organizations who are taking critical positions, they are sort of literally entangled in litigation. A lot of this litigation would eventually lead to nothing, but the process is the punishment. Bhasha Singh and I, we are both associated with a portal called NewsClick. And NewsClick, the Enforcement Directorate, the Income Tax Department, the Economic Offences Wing of the Delhi Police has all, sought to, at different points of time, paralyze the working of this organization. And NewsClick is not alone. There have been several other media organizations who have had to face. In India, this process is often the punishment. And what is being encouraged is downright sycophancy. So that those who are in power, they don't, look, nobody in power wants journalists to be critical. But what has happened is the change, the difference in India at present is that those who are in power are not just intolerant. Previous regimes have also not been tolerant, but they're not just intolerant, they become vengeful. I think that is a critical change that has taken place in the recent past. And I think the reason for that is that those at the very top in India, they may claim they believe in freedom of expression, which is a fundamental right of every Indian citizen, but their actions, the way they act is just the opposite, just the reverse. So, I can just confine my opening remarks here. I have a lot to say, but I'm sure my colleagues have a lot to say as well, and we can have a more detailed discussion on specific issues. But to just summarize the point, it's not just intolerance, it's being vengeful. And the laws and the law enforcing agencies are being misused to harass and intimidate those who are trying to do their job, journalists who are trying to do their job. It is the job of a journalist in a democracy to ask questions, ask tough questions to whoever is in power. Doesn't mean that they're anti-national. It doesn't mean that they're not patriotic. I stop here. I don't think Daniel is being alarmist. I think he's being quite realistic. Things are very bad. Let's accept that. And some of us are aware. Pamela is aware. She's been in the profession longer than I have. I've been in the profession for 44 years. I became a journalist in 1977, just after the emergency. We've actually regressed in time. Salil talked about L.K. Advani's famous remarks, to editors. When they were asked to bend, they crawled. They're not just, they haven't even been asked to bend. They're nevertheless crawling. I just want to add a few points by way of explaining, just adding, not explaining, adding to some of the issues that are being made. The issue of mob lynching that Bhasha talked about. Behind every single communal riot, Hindu, Muslim, and mob lynching, there's a WhatsApp message. Remember that this has happened on a scale that has never happened before. That is the medium for spreading hateful, incendiary speech. Secondly, let us accept the media has played a sterling role, the most important role in spreading Islamophobia in India. And 1 out of 7 Indians in a country of close to 1.4 billion has been demonized and made to feel they are second-class citizens. Those in power would like us to believe, and they're right, there are journalists and journalists. There are criminals among journalists. But it's also, you must understand that if the ruling regime says there are criminals or certain journalists are criminals, there are certain journalists who are very close to the ruling regime who have been accused of crimes. Mr. Arnab Goswami has been accused of rigging the ratings to ensure his television ratings are higher. Sudarshan TV. The case has gone to the Supreme Court. He's been accused of spreading hateful speech, fomenting hatred. The media in India today is part of not just the corrupt nexus between business and politics. It plays an active role in that nexus, together with sections of the bureaucracy and other officials. My last appeal to those in countries like the US, as Niranjan is not here, he's been unemployed, he just told you. Independent journalists are facing a crunch from all directions, and financial crunch is huge, supporting their families. You've been talking about self-censorship. The intimidation by the ruling elite has been absolutely unprecedented. Keep this in mind. And you have to do your bit to support people like us. Not me, people like Niranjan, but a full lot of other people who are facing tremendous threats to do the work that they are supposed to do. That's all I wanted to say.